It was quite a few years ago, before smartphones were everywhere, when I was a 33-year-old mom living in a quiet part of Oregon. One warm afternoon, I drove my two youngest kids, ages 2 and 4, to a clinic an hour away for a routine checkup. Because of how far we lived, the nurse always gave us the last 2 slots of the day, which we really appreciated. The clinic had recently moved into a new building tucked deep off a quiet road surrounded by trees, far from any town. The place was modern and clean, much nicer than their old space near the hospital. I parked our navy blue Subaru near the front door. Ours was one of just a few cars in the lot. After our appointment, the sun was beginning to set. I strapped the kids back into their seats and tried to start the car, but it wouldn't. The engine just clicked oddly, refusing to turn over. As the receptionist locked the glass doors behind us, I carried the kids back inside and asked to borrow their landline. I checked a phone book and called the nearest garage I could find. A man answered and said he'd head our way, though it might take him a while. I thanked them and took the kids back out to the car, rolled down the windows, and tried to keep them comfortable while we waited. It wasn't long before the building went completely dark and the last few staff cars left. We were totally alone in the fading daylight. I kept the kids busy with snacks, doing my best not to panic. Maybe 30 minutes later, a dusty red truck pulled up. A middle-aged man got out, waved, and told me he was there to help. He looked rough around the edges, but nothing unusual for a mechanic at the end of his shift. He smiled politely and went straight to lift my car's hood. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open, waiting for him to tell me when to try the engine. But he was taking his time. I asked what he thought the issue was, and he told me it was a loose wire, not the battery. He kept working under the hood, though I couldn't see his face from where I sat. More than once, he called for me to come take a look, saying he could show me which wire was the problem, so it wouldn't happen again. I stayed put and politely said I wouldn't understand it anyway. Something about him felt a little off, and although he wasn't being aggressive, I didn't want to leave my kids alone in the car either. He chuckled and made some light conversation that felt a little too familiar. I didn't laugh along. Then, out of nowhere, another truck pulled into the empty lot. As it did, the man working on my car slammed the hood shut, ran to his truck, and drove off without a word. I was confused and a bit nervous. Why would he take off so suddenly if he was just helping? The new truck parked beside mine, and a man stepped out, calling me by name. He introduced himself and apologized for the delay. He was clearly the same guy I had spoken to earlier on the phone. He pointed toward the road and asked who the man was who had just sped off. "I thought he was you," I replied, half laughing. This real mechanic grabbed jumper cables and began working on my car immediately. I sat in the driver's seat again, hopeful that we'd be on our way soon. A few minutes later, he walked over to my door holding something strange. "Ma'am, is this yours?" he asked, showing me a long, rust-colored tool, nearly 18 inches long. It looked ancient, shaped like a narrow dagger, but with 2 small rings on the handle, almost like surgical scissors. I told him I'd never seen it before in my life. He explained that he'd found it right on top of the engine, not buried or hidden. "It had to have just been placed there," he said, looking uneasy. "They're old, sure, but look how sharp they are." I leaned closer, and sure enough, the edge gleamed, recently sharpened. He got my car started, and my toddler cheered from the back seat. I turned the AAC on full blast and rolled up the windows while I got out to pay him. But instead of handing me a bill, he walked back to the curb and picked up the strange tool again. "I really want you to see this up close," he said quietly. This time I took a better look. It still looked old, but the edges were dangerously sharp. "These haven't been sitting there for long," he repeated. "Someone just put them there." A cold shiver went down my spine. As he took my payment, he added, "Ma'am, I don't know what was about to happen here, but I'm very glad I showed up when I did." He placed the weapon-like tool in my back seat, wrapped in an old rag, and we both left the lot, him turning right, me turning left, back toward the highway. When I got home, I called the local police. They listened politely, but declined to send anyone. One officer guessed from my description that it sounded like a form of surgical shears, something used in medical procedures. That alone gave me chills. I had hoped they'd test it for fingerprints or blood, but they didn't seem interested. I wrapped the thing in newspaper and stored it in our shed. It stayed there untouched until we moved a few years later. I didn't want to bring it with us, so I finally tossed it in the trash. Later, I read that several women had gone missing in parts of Oregon around that time. Some were found, others never were. I still wonder what might have happened to me, and to my kids, if that second man hadn't shown up right then. That day taught me a hard lesson. Even when you think you're cautious and aware, being tired, stressed, and out of your element can dull your instincts. I'll always be grateful for that mechanic's arrival, and for the life I still get to live. Back in 2004, I was 15 years old, just starting my sophomore year at Lakeville High. I was your classic bookish, shy girl, socially awkward, a little nerdy, and completely unprepared for any kind of attention, especially from boys. I had a habit of being friendly with the kinds of people others avoided, which sometimes led me into uncomfortable situations. Unfortunately, one of those became a nightmare. At school, clubs were a big deal, and the first one I joined was the Sci-Fi Club, finally a place where I thought I belonged. I went to the first meeting with a few friends and felt like I'd found my people. That's when I met a kid I now call Creeper Dan. I never learned his real name. He sat in front of me, and when I said hi, just being polite, something shifted. From that day on, Dan clung to me like a shadow. At first, he would just find me at lunch and stand nearby mumbling awkward things. His voice was quiet and shaky, and the way he stared was enough to send chills down your spine. He gave off a weird, intense vibe I couldn't ignore. I tried to keep conversations light and polite, but it got worse. Dan started asking personal questions, where I lived, what classes I had, who I hung out with. My friends and I began switching tables and hallways just to shake him. No matter what we did, he found me. After a year of this, my best friend Mason had enough. One lunch period, Dan approached with his usual whispery, "Hey, how's it going?" And Mason cut him off, saying, "She's not interested. Leave her alone." Dan looked hurt, mumbled something, and walked away. I was relieved, but also felt a little guilty, though I didn't see much of him after that, except when he sat across the room at club meetings staring at me. When I turned 17 and started driving, things got creepy again. One day, I noticed a dingy beige car parked right next to mine, way too close. Inside was Dan. He asked me how I was doing, if I was going to prom. I had no idea how he even knew which car was mine. From then on, he was always there, before and after school, like clockwork. My old childhood friend Zach, who walked with me sometimes, finally confronted Dan after seeing him by my car again. Zach told him to back off or else. That did the trick, temporarily. Later that year, Dan asked one of my softball teammates to prom, only to ditch her and follow me the whole night. I didn't even know until friends saw footage from the school's media club. There he was, in the background of video clips, just staring at me. It was disturbing, but nothing compared to what came next. During the last club party of the year, which I stupidly offered to host, Dan showed up. I didn't remember inviting him, so someone else must have told him. He acted overly friendly, even chatted with my dad and asked where my room was. I wanted to vanish. For days after, I'd hear a car outside and find myself hiding under my desk, terrified he was out there. Once, he waved at me during his graduation ceremony. Out of thousands of people, he found me in the crowd. I tried to forget him after I graduated. I moved to a college town, got a job at a retail store, and started living a normal life. But normal didn't last. He found me again. He showed up at my store one day, pretending like we were still friends. He claimed a buddy saw me working there. I called for help repeatedly over the staff radio, and finally, a co-worker pulled me into the back. After that, security was notified and told to keep an eye out. The worst part? Dan never came alone. His creepy friend, who we dubbed Silent Mike, would scout the store, likely texting Dan when I was around. I tested this theory by wandering through the store with a co-worker. Sure enough, Silent Mike followed us. Minutes later, Dan arrived. I confronted him, lied about giving him my number again, and told him never to come back. I hid in the back and cried while security walked him out. They told me Dan cried too. But it wasn't over. One night after work, I found Dan leaning on his car next to mine. Security called the cops. He bolted when the squad car pulled up. Years went by, and I thought I was safe. I even bought a different car to throw him off. But in 2013, as my friends and I left work to go out for the night, I heard that dreaded voice. Hey! There he was again, with Silent Mike in the car, just watching me. Thankfully, one of my guy friends was there. He pretended to be my boyfriend and threatened Dan. Dan got so scared he nearly tripped over himself getting into his car. Since then, if he shows up at the store, my friend just gives him a look and Dan leaves. He never buys anything. He just watches. Now, I'm married and recently moved back to my hometown to start a business. Even now, I find myself checking over my shoulder when I go out. I never knew Dan's real name, and honestly, I didn't want to. But recently, out of curiosity and closure, I borrowed a yearbook from an old classmate. I found him. His name was Eric. About a year ago, when I was 21, something happened that still gives me chills. My boyfriend, Jordan, and I were both college juniors living in an off-campus student housing complex in a mid-sized town in Oregon. Our unit was on the 3rd floor, and the building's small gym was on the ground level. The stairwell we used most of the time always made me uneasy. It had poor lighting and an eerie, hollow space under the steps that someone could easily hide in. It also connected to a dim side alley that rarely had foot traffic. It was a Saturday night around 9:45 p.m. when Jordan and I decided to hit the gym. As expected, it wasn't busy, just one other guy on a treadmill. But since it was a weekend, a lot of people were coming and going from parties in the building. The gym had tall windows that looked out into the hallway, and you could see who was coming and going. I was working out by the window, doing squats and using dumbbells, while Jordan was lifting in the back near the machines. Since we weren't side by side, anyone passing by might not have known we were together. About 15 minutes into my workout, I noticed two guys walking past the gym in the hallway. They glanced in at me before heading into the stairwell across from the gym. I didn't think too much of it at first, but I took mental note. Then a few minutes later, the same two guys walked back by, this time with another friend. Again, they all looked directly at me. That's when I started feeling a little off. This didn't just happen once. Over the next 10 to 15 minutes, more guys began joining them, each pass adding a new face until I counted around 7 or 8 in total. They'd walk past the gym slowly, all of them locking eyes with me, almost like they were taking turns studying me. After a while, they stopped walking in a group and began passing by one at a time, some of them blatantly staring. Feeling more than a little creeped out, I went over to Jordan and explained what was going on. He kept an eye out while I continued to wrap up my session. As I was rolling up my yoga mat and cleaning the equipment, I had my back to the hallway. Jordan later told me that one of the guys had slipped into the unisex bathroom right outside the gym, between the hallway and the stairwell. According to Jordan, the guy kept peeking out from the cracked door and staring directly at me. Usually, I'd walk back to our apartment on my own since Jordan's workouts are longer. But after that, there was no way I was going near that stairwell alone. I sat on a bench next to Jordan and waited for him to finish. The next time the bathroom door opened, the guy peeked out again. Only this time, he saw me sitting next to Jordan. Without hesitation, he stepped out and quickly exited toward the back stairwell. Jordan is a tall, solid guy, about 6 feet 3 inches, and we both think that once the guy saw I wasn't alone, he backed off. Nothing else happened that night, and we didn't see any of those guys again. But both of us felt like something more sinister had been brewing. We strongly suspect the guy in the bathroom was acting as a lookout, waiting for me to leave alone. If I had, maybe the others would have been waiting in that dark stairwell or outside in the alley. Maybe they intended to do something far worse. Of course, we'll never really know. After that night, I never walked to the gym by myself again. We ended up moving to a different building a few months later, and I finally feel safe again. But I still get that same uneasy feeling when I see a dark stairwell. It was a chilly night in November 2023 when I had one of the scariest experiences of my life. For reference, I'm a 17-year-old girl now, but I was 16 at the time and living in a pretty quiet and safe suburban town in Oregon. The whole thing still feels unreal, like something that shouldn't happen where I live. I'm a dedicated runner, part of the cross-country team at school. But November is our off-season, so I keep up my training on my own. I usually run in the evenings during the week to stay in shape. That particular evening was the first day of our Thanksgiving break. I was so tired from school stress that I passed out for a nap right after I got home. When I woke up, it was already dark out. I didn't really want to go for my usual run, but I told myself if I did it that night, I could rest all weekend. So I got ready, black leggings, hoodie, earbuds, and told my older brother I was heading out. He said, "Be careful, it's dark out," which felt odd since he never says that. Looking back, maybe that was a warning sign. It was after 8 p.m. when I finally started my usual route. I chose a path I used often at night. It followed a busy street and was pretty well lit. A few blocks in, I veered off into a quiet neighborhood to get in the last mile. I'd run there a dozen times, so I felt comfortable even though it was dimly lit. The neighborhood had a single main road that ended in a cul-de-sac, with several smaller side lanes branching off. I would usually go down a few of these to add distance to my run. Just as I turned around at the dead end to head back, I noticed a dark green sedan slowly rolling down the street toward me. It looked beat up and old, which made me uneasy. But I tried to convince myself the driver was just admiring holiday lights or looking for a house. As I passed the car, I nodded and tried to see inside. There was a man in the driver's seat, probably in his 40s, but I couldn't see anyone else clearly because the back windows were heavily tinted. He didn't wave back. He just stared. I turned into one of the side lanes, hoping that would be the end of it. But when I looked back, the car had turned around and was creeping back my way. My stomach dropped. I told myself maybe he made a wrong turn. But when I turned around again at the end of the side lane, there was the same sedan, now creeping into the lane I was on, moving at a crawl. I lowered my music volume, and my heart began to race. The car drifted into the center of the road, almost blocking my path. Then it came to a complete stop. My instincts kicked in, and without thinking, I darted across the yards of nearby houses, trying not to slip in the grass. That's when I noticed, under a streetlight, that there were two people in the back seat, sitting close to the doors. I hadn't seen them before because of the tinted windows. I kept sprinting through lawns, trying to stay out of sight, until I spotted a large van parked in a driveway. I crouched behind the back wheel and realized I was wearing a bright blue hoodie, not exactly subtle in the dark. I peeled it off and stuffed it under the van to avoid being spotted. Peeking out carefully, I saw the green sedan had pulled into the middle of the street again. The driver was looking side to side, scanning the road like he was trying to spot me. The people in the back seat were also glancing around. I couldn't see their faces, but their presence sent chills down my spine. At that moment, I realized how vulnerable I was. I'm just 5 feet 1 inch and barely 100 pounds. If they had tried anything, I wouldn't have stood a chance. Then, thankfully, another car came driving down the street. At the sight of it, the green sedan sped off, turning out of the neighborhood fast. I stayed hidden behind that van for a long time, probably 10 minutes, until I was sure they were gone. I felt kind of foolish, like maybe I'd overreacted, but deep down, I knew something was off. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. I took a different route to finish my run, and was almost back to my house when I saw the same green sedan slowly approaching a stop sign ahead, right on the street next to mine. My heart sank. There was no mistaking it. Same car. Same driver. He stopped at the sign and looked right at me, not moving. It felt like he was waiting, either for me to pass or to see what I would do. I slowed to a jog, completely freaked out. I could barely breathe. I noticed the back door on the car was slightly open. Were they planning to jump out and grab me? I couldn't think straight, but then I remembered a shortcut through a neighbor's backyard that led to my street. I turned around and sprinted across their lawn and through the gap between two fences, never looking back. Once I hit my street, I ducked behind a tall bush in front of my house, trying to calm my racing heart. Seconds later, the green sedan rolled slowly down the street. It paused for a moment near my house, then sped away again when another vehicle came up behind it. That was the last time I saw the car, but I didn't feel safe until I was locked inside. I never got a look at the license plate. I wish I had. These days, I don't run after dark anymore. I also wear a safety whistle and never stick to the same route. It's terrifying knowing those people now know where I run, and almost where I live. To any girls who jog or walk at night, switch up your routines. Always stay alert. It might seem paranoid, but staying safe is more important than finishing a workout. I don't know what those people in the car had planned. I'm just beyond grateful I never had to find out.